Listen to part of a lecture in a theater class.
As we've seen, over the course of the 19th century, British theatre changed dramatically. Despite your studies, you've probably never heard of James Planchet. He was an individual who had one of the most profound and least recognized impacts on British theatre. Planchet was born in 1796 in Piccadilly, London. By the age of 14, he had already written several amateur plays and was apprenticing with a bookseller in an attempt to sell them. By chance, an actor happened upon one of Planchet's early plays and recognized the potential it contained. This actor performed the play at Drury Lane, and Planchet's writing career began. However, most of his early plays were described as unremarkable. Until 1820, his most notable play, called The Vampire, was known most for the presence of a trapdoor which allowed actors to seem to disappear beneath the stage and reappear as if from nowhere. This play, however, was not notable for what Planchet would later become famous for, costuming. As was typical in other plays of the time, The Vampire used costuming that was not realistic to the situation. The play was set in Scotland, and the actors wore costumes that would clearly convey to the audience that they were Scottish, but in stereotypical or unrealistic ways. For example, in the opening scene, a woman is shown hiding in a cave. She has been forced into it because of a storm that began raging while she was on a hunting trip, yet she is wearing a formal Scottish ball gown, complete with jewels. Planchet realized that this was ridiculous. The costumes were not realistic to the situation the actor was supposed to be in. In other plays, actors would wear modern clothing, despite the play being based in the past. Planchet believed that costumes should be accurate to a play's situation. In 1823, he published an article saying that more attention should be paid to the time period of the play, particularly Shakespearean plays. At the time, actors in these plays would wear modern clothing, despite the fact that the plays were written over 300 years prior. Finally, people were beginning to recognize him as something outside the ordinary. He was given control over the Shakespearean play King John. He kept the actors and sets relatively unchanged, but spent an incredible amount of time planning the costumes. His publications, before the play was produced, he published a 22-costume book which detailed, with historical accuracy, the costumes of all of the major characters. The book was remarkable because it made no reference to the theater, the actors, the Shakespearean text. It just went into significant detail about how the costumes should be constructed and how they should appear. Planchet was not just creating costumes tailored to the actor, but also tailored to the play itself. Though the actors in King John seemed to think that this adaptation of Shakespeare might be a flop, it enjoyed great success. The accurate costuming made it easier for audiences to imagine the setting of the play. His time period costuming was so successful that Planchet went on to design historically accurate costumes for all of Shakespeare's histories, and 7 of his non-histories. You know, his style of costuming with historical accuracy, rather than using unrealistic costumes, became the standard for Shakespearean plays for the next century. Planchet's desire for historical accuracy in costuming seemed almost obsessive. He would extensively research the appropriate time period for each play, and clearly stated that he preferred accurate costuming to fanciful costuming. But his loyalty was to the play over the time period. For example, in researching Hamlet, Planchet determined that the appropriate setting was 8th century Denmark. A Danish prince of that time would have worn scarlet, which is a brilliant red-orange. Yet one of Shakespeare's characters remarks that Hamlet, the Danish prince, is wearing sable, which is a dark brown-black. Planchet wrote of this problem and said he wished the contradiction wasn't there, but in the end he costumed Hamlet in sable, keeping with Shakespeare's original vision. From Shakespeare, he moved on to using historically accurate costumes in new genres. When he transitioned to Greek and Roman mythology, he used his costumes for comedic effect. He produced a play in which the characters were dressed in completely accurate Greek costumes, yet played a modern British card game. The irony of seeing realistically ancient costumes juxtaposed with the modern actions of the actors was a hit, and soon other writers began copying the technique. The amount of time and research Planchet put into all his costumes was widely recognized. Historians consulted him about the correct placement of armor and other artifacts well into his retirement. Playwrights continued their attempt to create historically accurate costumes for the next 100 years.